Hey guys, Brian Delivers You the Goods here. I'm finally returning to you today for this next end of the year video. I was gonna hold off on this end of the year video till Saturday, but I found out that I'm gonna be working that day, so I might as well get it out of the way for you guys this afternoon. For decent to good movies of 2024 video. It was a video I was gonna hold off on, but I decided, you know what? Let's go ahead and get it out of the way. And the worst movies of 2024 video will be on Monday. Just so you guys know. Because I'm going to be really busy Sunday. Working and just doing some house chores. So I still got to do some house chores during the end of this week. But it's not that many left. But other than that, I'm going to discuss what's on the list from 28 to 1. What are the decent good to good movies of this year that I put on this list, and let you know my thoughts on each one. So let's start with number 28, which is Longlegs. Now this movie was kind of weird and creepy, to be honest. Nicolas Cage plays this weird character in this film. Not a good person, I'll tell you that, in this film. Kind of a creepo and a stalker, probably a pedophile in this film. But what I didn't like is that this film kind of... Well, I thought the film was probably the decent movie of the year, but it wasn't anything special that I've seen throughout the year. But it's watchable for the runtime it goes for. It came out back on July 12th, and I thought this movie was fairly decent for how it turned out. It was just a weird movie. I can tell you that. It psychologically gets to you. Number 27 is Sleeping Dogs. This had Russell Crowe in this movie. The ending will surprise you, where you find out that he has some kind of Alzheimer's disease, and then he's trying to remember what led him up to the point of a case that gets reinvestigated, and you find out the person is innocent that's in jail right now. But it all revolves around, okay, so the whole time, if you watch the movie, it came out back in, I believe, March this year, like March 22nd or something like that. But from what I gathered, I think the movie's fairly decent, but the ending will make you not like Russell Crowe's character at the end of it. But overall, I gave it like a 7 out of 10 or something like that, because it was fairly decent for the runtime, and for the storyline and the dialogue, it was alright for what it went for. Number 26 is Kill. Now this movie is a Middle Eastern movie. I didn't hate this Hindu movie, but I just thought the performances were solid, but it was just the execution of the script that was fairly decent. The action scenes were pretty good, but I just think this movie kind of got a little too dramatic at times, with some dramatic scenes and moments where you think it's going to get better or it's going to be bad. But either way, the movie performed decently, for the action scenes being the best parts. The fight scenes were the best parts. But the overall, it's kind of like a John Wick Hindu movie in a way, but it's not bad. Number 25 is Oddity. Now this movie was about this woman that lost her sister to this guy that was married to her, and she finds out that the guy was behind the sister's murder. He never loved her at all, and then he's trying to expose those people for what they are. And eventually, the truth does come out later on, but it's just, this movie was decent. It's just one of those movies you can watch throughout the year and probably forget about it, because it's just a decent film for how it turned out. Number 24 is Cuckoo. This is a movie I watched back in August Well, I didn't watch it in August, but I watched it in like October. But I at least got it on this list, and certain October movies are on the list too. Not really a lot of October movies, just one October movie is on this list. But from what I gathered, Cuckoo was a weird movie. It basically, this guy lures this late Gretchen in by luring her with this flute or whatever that's like a bird sound, and it's attracting weird things, and she's getting injured a lot. And basically is just dealing with a lot of things. So pretty much she lives in this weird town, and she gets a job as a desk operator or whatever. Like basically works in a convenient hotel that has like food and all that. So she's a lobby customer service rep or whatever. So pretty much from what I gathered with this movie, I think the ending was weird and had some fair moments, but it was just the blonde hair lady kind of was screaming like a bird or whatever, and it was kind of messing with her eardrums and just making her bleed a lot. It was a weird movie, I can tell you that, but it was fairly decent. So that's my number 24 pick. Number 23 is The Book of Clarence. Now, this movie came out in January. I didn't get to watch it till like, I think it was summertime. I started the January movies, but I did get pretty far. I did get very far in the past 6 months from what I watched, and I'm almost caught up on every fourth quarter movie. I am almost to the November films, but it's gonna be another week till I get around to it. Probably close to this weekend or the end of the week, I'll probably get to the Venom movie. And give me a second, I gotta pause the video real quick. Sorry about that, guys. My mom was summoning me for a second. That's why she gave me that phone call. So, the Book of Clarence was kind of in similarity to The Passion of the Christ in a way, but it's a more modernized version and kind of has some, I wouldn't say comedic moments, but it has some a few vulgar language in a bit. It's nothing like Passion of the Christ. Well, it kind of is in a bit, in a sense, but towards the end it starts to get that way, because Clarence is kind of a nobody for a while and doesn't believe in God. But then he eventually follows Jesus later on, tries to be his own Messiah. Well, he tries to be his own Messiah, and then the Romans kind of whip him and basically do horrible shit to him. So, pretty much it was pretty fucked up what happened. Even with the story of Jesus and how he was crucified for our sins, and he died for our sins and came back a few days later. So, basically, from what I gathered, The Book of Clarence is a decent movie. The ending starts to get a little more emotional towards the end, and it makes it more interesting of a watch. So, I wouldn't say the first half was not the best, but it was fine. But it does rip off the story of Jesus and all that in a way. So that's what I didn't really like about it, but hey, the movie didn't turn out that bad. Number 22 is Turtles All the Way Down. This is with Isabella Merced in this film. This movie was kind of decent, but I just think I had some issues with how she says you gotta kill the bacteria and all that. It's like, what the fuck? She was going through some sort of mental break in this film, and honestly, she was having some issues with her anxiety and all that. And this movie was based off a book, but I never read the book. I just only watched the movie. And from what I've seen with the movie, it's fairly decent, but has a few hiccups throughout the film with the kill the bacteria and how she's listening to the voices in her head. It was weird. I mean, this movie wasn't terrible, but it had some cringe moments from time to time. But it was a decent film, and it was on this list. Number 21 is Speak No Evil. Now, this one was a odd movie, but you meet, what's his name? I know his name. Can't think of it right now, but from what I gathered with this film, I think the storyline was interesting. The execution had its moments, but it wasn't that bad of a film. But from what I gathered, it wasn't that terrible from what I've seen. I know the actor's name, it's at the tip of my tongue from what I gathered. So, give me a second, I gotta pause the video again. Give me one moment. So now I remembered the guy's name, James McAvoy, plays as the character in this film. That's basically kind of an abusive fuck, and there's a lot more to the story than you realize with this film. It explains it more towards the end, but it was a decent film from the thriller moments of the movie. Closer to the end, it got interesting, but I had a few critiques with this film, but it wasn't that terrible. Number 20 is Reagan. I know Watch Mojo put this on their worst movies, and I didn't agree with them there, because I think this movie was fairly decent from what I watched. I wouldn't say it was one of my favorite movies of this year, but it's in the top 20 of decent to good movies of 2024, because Dennis Quaid's performance was not so bad, from what I gathered. He actually tried to make it an interesting performance. I mean, sure, there were a few critiques throughout the movie, and there was one funny line that I liked where he says, "How can I talk to these leaders if they all keep fucking dying on me?" And it was just like, what? It made me laugh a little, but it was some serious stuff about how the Russian presidents keep getting assassinated and killed so much. So, I think the movie had an interesting premise and an interesting dialogue, but the execution for some scenes in it had its hit or miss moments. Sorry, I stuttered for a second. But other than that, Reagan is my number 20. Number 19 is Challengers. Now, this is with Zendaya in it and Mike Feist. Feist, I believe is how you pronounce it. The guy that played in West Side Story as one of the guys or whatever. So, one of the Brooklyn guys or whatever. But from what I gathered, this movie was decent as well. It wasn't one of my favorites, but it did have some moments where I was enjoying the tennis parts of it. But tennis, in my opinion, is kind of boring. I mean, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I just think this movie had something going for it with the story, but it's the execution that was the thing with this film. There were some moments I was liking it, and moments where I was like, the performances could have been better, but it's a decent movie. Number 18 is Daddy-O, and this has what's her name? Dakota Johnson in this film. I think with this film, it had an interesting storyline from what I watched. I mean, she was in a taxi most of the time, but the ending got really personal with her and her character, and I think that's where the cliffhanger to the end of the movie started having a little more sense of hope at the end of it. But I think from what I gathered with this film, it's fairly average. I put it at the top average part of this list at number 18 because it wasn't one of my favorite movies, but it had a solid ending at the end of it. It made it interesting to watch closer to the end of the film because you really get to see the more emotional sides of the movie. But it was a fairly average movie, and it's at my number 18 on this list. Number 17 is Blink Twice. This is a Channing Tatum movie I watched this year. I didn't necessarily hate it, but I think there were some hit or miss moments with this movie that I thought was alright, but fairly average. Basically, you have Channing Tatum that's like this bad guy or whatever, and he says he said it multiple times close to the end of it, where like, I'm sorry, and it's like, okay, we get that you say you're sorry, but you're not really sorry for what you did to these women in the film as his character, not in real life as the character he's portraying as in this film. But from what I gathered, this film is fairly average for the storyline, but there are a few critiques with some of the story and its execution. So that's why it made it at my number 17, because it's an average film, but it's at the top tier of the average list on this big list of decent to good movies of 2024 video. Number 16 is Lisa Frankenstein. This one was a movie I watched about 5 months ago or something like that. But I didn't necessarily hate this movie. I just think there were some moments where Catherine Newton's performance had its hiccups. Like, there were moments where it was good and moments where it was not the best, from what I gathered. But I think, from what I've seen, Cole Sprouse plays the monster in this film, the Frankenstein monster. And it's not terrible of a film, but it has its hiccups from time to time with this film. So that's why I put it at number 16, because it's kind of in the halfway point of this list. Number 15 is Love Lies Bleeding. Now this is another film I did slightly enjoy, and from what I gathered with this film, it's not terrible. Kristen Stewart plays in this movie, and she plays one of the lovers of this girl that's like a bodybuilder. And then they get into some heavy shit with Kristen Stewart's dad in this film. The dad that's in the film kind of is some kind of slumlord and a drug lord in a way. And give me a second, I gotta pause the video again. I am so sorry about that, guys. I had to pause the video again because I was getting interrupted for a second, but everything's good now. So pretty much, Love Lies Bleeding is a average movie, but I have a few critiques with this film, with its overall reception and performance of the film itself for the final product. Number 14 is Asphalt City. Now we're at the halfway point. I think this movie was average from what I've seen. It has Sean, what's his name? I know his name. I just can't think of his last name from what I gathered. But from what I've seen with the film, I think it's fairly average from what I've seen. And the overall performance of the movie had some moments where I was really interested in the film, but the ending was kind of the sad part of the film, with the harsh reality of why things are the way they are in Asphalt City, because some things can be fixed, some things can't. But from what I gathered, think the film had an interesting story, but its execution was the thing. Number 13 is Bad Boys Ride or Die. Now, this film has Will Smith and Martin Lawrence in this film again, in the fourth film in this saga of movies they've made in the series of the Bad Boys films. The third one came back out in 2020, and it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't my favorite. This one was a little better than the third film, but I did have a few critiques with its whole storyline and how it turned out. But overall, I think this movie had solid execution, and the script was good. The action scenes were probably my favorite in the film. So they did not disappoint with the action sequences in this film, with the fight scenes and the shootout scenes. So this movie entertained, but only to make it an average film. Number 12 is Immaculate. This is a movie with, what's her name? Immaculate. I'm just looking it up real quick. I was starting to forget her name. Sydney Sweeney. That's her name. I am so sorry that I am forgetful of some things, but she plays a character named Cecilia, and she goes to this church, like this church or whatever, that's basically taking her in and giving her hospitality. And then apparently things happen with this convent that doesn't go very well towards when she figures out what they're doing to women. And it's pretty sick, to be honest. But the ending was the weirdest part, and it was just... The ending was solid, but not something to really watch through, because it's kind of sick in what she does at the end of the film, Sydney Sweeney's character. So overall, I think Immaculate did have a decent story, but the ending was pretty fucked up from what I've seen. Number 11 is Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. Michael Keaton plays as Beetlejuice again in this film. And as the sequel, it's a average sequel, but it's not as good as the first film. The first film was good. I had a few critiques with the first film, but nothing to the extent where I hated the first film. I think it was a classic. But this one was a fairly average sequel, and it didn't do so bad. Astrid, I believe, is played by Jenna Ortega in this film. Winona Ryder's character's daughter in this film. So, from what I gathered, I think this film had an average storyline and all that, and it had some weird, odd moments in this film with Beetlejuice towards the end of the film. There was a creepy scene where these people's phones sucked them into their own phones, and it was fucking creepy, for sure. It was one of the creepiest scenes of the movie, and probably would give you nightmares, but I did enjoy some of the entertainment in this film, but it's almost made it in the top 10 of this list, but not worthy, but still in the top 15. Number 10 is Maxine. Now, this is at the top of the top 10 list. I think Maxine had an interesting story. Pretty much Mia Goth's performance was pretty solid in this film. Shia LaBeouf's ex in this film did actually perform this movie very well. And I think this film had an interesting storyline, but the execution was the thing. There were some moments where it was good and fairly average, so I gave it like a 7.5 out of 10 or something like that with this film. It was some rating I gave it, but I think it was not a bad film from what I've seen, and I put it at my number 10. Number 9 is Twisters. This is the sequel to the Twister movie, in its own way. But Glenn Powell in this movie, his performance wasn't bad as one of the main characters of the film. But he's kind of like this country boy that wants to do crazy redneck things. So it was weird, but it wasn't weird. It was just kind of stupidity at the beginning of the movie on his part. But as the movie progresses, it gets a little more interesting of a watch and made it to be in the top 10 of the decent to good movies of 2024. And that's why I put it at number 9. Number 8 is It Ends With Us. Now, this is a fairly average film. Blake Lively plays as one of the victims in the movie from domestic abuse in this film. So, what I didn't like is she jokes a little too much in this film. That was the downside to the film, but the rest of the movie played out alright in this film. But the guy that she was with in the film was an abuser, a domestic abuser of hers, and just that's what the movie was surrounding itself with the topic of the movie. The topic was basically about domestic abusers, domestic abuse, and all that. So it was kind of sad and unfortunate with this film, but she kind of joked in an interview about it too much that I did not like. And I was like, okay, you kind of need to stop joking around a little too much, hanging around Ryan Reynolds too much, your husband. And basically, I think the movie's alright, but I have a few critiques with it. Number 7 is Smile 2. Now, this is a recent film I just reviewed recently. It made it on this list at the last moment, and I'm glad it did because it was an average film. Because, honestly, the storyline for 2 hours and 9 minutes, it's a little longer than the first one, but only by like 15 minutes longer. But it's not terrible of a film. I think the story surrounding with Naomi Scott's character, Sky Riley, she's basically this pop singer, and then things happen where she witnesses a murder of her friend Lewis. That's like her dealer or whatever. And he kills himself right in front of her. And that's where the smile creature comes into play and messes with her headspace and makes her see all kinds of illusions and all that, hallucinations and all that. And then it eventually kills her, the smile creature. And it's unfortunate. But it was an ending that was kind of going to happen. But to be expected, Smile 2 was an interesting sequel. And not one of the worst ones. It's better than the first one, but only by a little bit. Number 6 is Fly Me to the Moon. Another average movie I did not necessarily hate. I think this film had some interesting points with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum in this film, with their characters and how their chemistry was in this film was pretty good from what I watched. But the execution of the film had its moments where it was good or iffy, but from what I watched with this film, it was worthy to be in the top 10. So that's my number 6. Number 5 is Arthur the King. It's a movie I watched a few months ago. It was a March 15th movie, but it wasn't bad with Mark Wahlberg in this film and the dog and all that. So it had an interesting story and very motivational story about a dog that was astray or whatever, and then he does find a home with Mark Wahlberg and them because he helps them with their little marathon that they're doing, this kind of event that they're at where they're trying to win this competition or whatever, so they win a good prize or whatever. But other than that, it was about the heart and compassion of this film that I really appreciated about this film. and it made it a very heartfelt movie to watch through. Number 4 is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. This was a good film. I put it on this in the top 5 because it was worthy to be in the top 5. I think this film had some interesting moments, but it did have a few critiques with the storyline. Nothing to the extent where I hated it, but it was kind of dragging on a little bit. But it was a good film for the action sequences and the more thriller ape fight scenes sequences that I did enjoy to an extent. Number 3 is One More Shot. This had Scott Adkins in this film, returning in the sequel to the first film, One Shot. I think this film had an interesting story. It came out at the beginning of this year, but I did not necessarily hate this film. I had some enjoyment with some of the film, but there were a few critiques with some of the not performance, but the performance of the movie had a few critiques with certain sequences of the film, but it made it a good film for the storyline itself. Number 2 is Land of Bad. I think this film was a good movie. I did enjoy some moments of this film that I was really interested in, but I did have some critiques with this film that I did not necessarily hate, but I did not necessarily love, but it's a good war film movie in a way, but it stars Liam Hemsworth and also Russell Crowe and others, and this film made it to be an interesting film of the year, but one of the good movies of the year, but not, it was the runner-up, unfortunately. You'll find out what the next movie is going to be the good movie of the year. And starting right now, at number 1, drum roll please. The Fall Guy is my number 1 good movie of the year. I think this movie was good in its own way. It made it as an interesting movie of a watch this year. It stars Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt in this film, and I was really interested in the performance and the whole aspect of the film with what it's about. Ryan Gosling plays a stuntman, and he basically is doing all the dangerous stuff, but then an accident kind of injures him for a while. He has a pretty serious injury after a while. Then he gets called in to come back to do another stunt job or whatever for this next movie of Emily Blunt's. In this film, her character has another movie that she's about to release or go into production with, but he kind of goes more into the stunt doubling scene again and takes the job and all that, and then things happen in the job site where there's some corruption and things happening where someone's trying to do shit to Ryan Gosling and throw him under the bus and make him kind of a fall guy in a way to things that the guy who was doing the stunts for, the actual actor, is basically sitting on his ass and not really doing a whole lot. But from what I gathered, The Fall Guy was a good movie, and it was one of the good movies of the year, and made it at my number 1, because it was very special of a movie, and I did have some enjoyment with this film. So that is going to be it for the Decent to Good Movies of 2024 list. I hope you enjoyed all the way from 28 to 1 that I got to break down. I'm sorry I had to pause the video a few times during this film, or during this video, I meant to say. I kept saying film. I don't know why. But, I think this list, hopefully you guys did enjoy the list. I will have more videos coming out pretty soon as I can. It's going to be a busy rest of the day, and I'll probably get the next video out tomorrow or so for another quick track review. But I'll let you know what I decide to do for the next video. But until then, you guys have a good rest of your afternoon. I appreciate you guys watching the next end of the year video for Decent to Good Movies of 2024. And as always, I will see you in my next review. Thanks for watching.